Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tara Romano, and I'm the Executive Editor of Consumer Goods Technology. I would like to welcome you all to today's web seminar, a continuing part of the Consumer Goods Web Connection series. We appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today, and would especially like to thank Data Alliance for their support in sponsoring this event. Today we will be talking about vendor-managed inventory, a process that has been in place at many consumer goods companies for years, but which is now being looked at more closely by industry leaders. I'm thrilled to have Dannon with us today to share their VMI experience and discuss how it has truly become a strategic initiative. For our discussion today, we will be joined by three industry leaders who will share their insights, and then we'll have an interactive Q&A session. Our first speaker today will be Mike Griswold, who is a Research VP and Team Lead for Gartner's AMR Supply Chain Research Group. He is responsible for assisting supply leaders with their business and technology initiatives. Previous roles include helping line of business users align corporate strategy with their supply chain process and technology initiatives. Mike's background includes 3 years leading the research at AMR prior to the Gartner acquisition, 3 years as the Director of Supply Chain Business Programs at Albertsons, and 10 years as a strategic process leader for supply chain at Shaw Supermarkets. Our next speaker will be Paula Sawyer, who is the VMI CPSR Manager at the Dannon Company, where she leads the customer collaboration efforts and teams within the Customer Solutions Department. In her current role, she has implemented changes to improve both the internal and external scorecards of Dannon's top customers. She is currently involved as a steering committee member in defining the Dannon supply chain structure of the future. Paula is also a member of CSEMP, VIX, where she's a CPFR and Logistics Committee member, and the GMA, where she's a Logistics Committee member. Prior to joining Dannon, she held various leadership positions over 16 years with Nestle USA, ranging from finance to supply chain. And third speaker, last but certainly not least, will be Scott Kleiner, who is responsible for sales and marketing of the Data Alliance VMI service in the consumer packaged goods industry. He joined Data Alliance in 2009 from IBM, where he had executive and management roles in IBM's consumer-driven supply chain initiative and global vendor-managed inventory services. So you can see we really do have some experts with us today. As with all of our events, one of our goals is to make them as interactive as possible and to get as much feedback from you throughout. In the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you should notice the Q&A feature. We encourage you to ask questions of the speakers throughout the event, as they will be responding to those that come in throughout their presentations and in a joint Q&A at the end. Please use the Q&A panel and not the chat panel for questions. Our panelists will not be able to see questions that are submitted through the chat function. On another logistical note, a PDF of the slides will be available upon request. So with that, I'd like to again thank you for attending, and let's hand the floor over to Mike.
Thank you, Tara. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I know you all have a lot of things on your plate, so thank you for carving out an hour to spend some time with us. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes and just provide you a perspective on, from the retailer side, what are some of the things that we're seeing happen on the retailer side, and how does it relate to consumer products companies relative to this idea of joint value creation in particular, and then more specifically, what's the role of vendor-managed inventory within this concept of joint value creation. We'll talk a little bit about some of the supply chain challenges we see. One of the key ingredients in this joint value creation conversation in VMI is the role of inventory. I want to share a little bit some of the findings that we're seeing as we talk to retailers and consumer products companies both about the role of inventory. We'll talk a little bit about VMI. I'll share some observations in terms of metrics. What are some of the functionalities that organizations are looking for from their partners around VMI? What are some of the value drivers of VMI? And then some closing thoughts. So if we think about this idea of joint value creation, we've developed this maturity model that you can see on this slide, which looks at not only the value to the supplier, but also value to the end consumer. And what I would observe is that we've spent a lot of time, at least on the retail side, talking a lot around this lower left-hand area around transactions. So how do we take care of the day-to-day business of talking between retailers and trading partners? And what we really want to go, and where we really want to go with these conversations are, as we move out on this graph, more strategic And finally, much more joint value creation. And it's the types of conversations around inventory, around forecasting, around VMI that will help us start to grow in maturity, both from the retailer side and then growing those relationships with our trading partners. When we talk to retailers and consumer products companies, we ask them, what are some of the things that you're working on, struggling with, in terms of answering the question around what is joint value creation. You can see 5 of the key things that tend to emerge in those conversations. So what's the focus? Is it really around just the transactional side, or are we really trying to build relationships? How do we improve the supplier sensing capabilities? How do we align the performance of our business with our trading partners, and how do we align that with the business strategy? And if I'm a more mature retailer, how do I help develop some of my supplier capabilities, and vice versa? If I'm working with more mature trading partners, how do I learn from them? How do I bring some of those best practices into my retail organization? And lastly, what type of connectivity should we have between our suppliers? And it's really this first one, the focus on the relationship, and the last one around connectivity, where we see people really focusing their time, and in particular, where we see VMI starting to emerge. Now, when we talk to our retailers, and to some degree our consumer product companies that we work with, we really try to use this framework, this demand-driven framework that really helps people understand the supply chain, the value chain, and the intersection of 3 key components: demand, supply, and product. At the center of this, though, you can see we're really focused on the demand side. How do I sense, shape, profitably respond to demand? Joint value creation, the ability to work together on our forecasting capabilities, the idea of VMI in terms of how do I respond to that, all play a part in tying those 3 concepts together: demand, supply, and product. Now, we get asked quite often by retailers and by our consumer products companies, I understand this idea of demand-driven. I understand of managing this idea of demand, supply, and product, but what's in it for me? What's the business value? So hopefully you're familiar with our supply chain top 25 research that we've done over the past number of years, where we look at a mix of financial metrics, 3 you see here: return on assets, inventory turn, and revenue growth, as well as feedback from peers around the top supply chains across all industries. One of the things that we've done is we've taken those 3 metrics and we've compared retailers in this example to that demonstrate demand-driven capabilities. They understand how to manage the relationships between demand, supply, and product. And we've compared their performance in these 3 categories to those that are less demand-driven. And you can see there's pretty significant business value in becoming demand-driven as we look at these 3 financial metrics. And I'll tell you, when we look at these same metrics for our consumer products clients who are becoming more demand-driven compared to those that aren't quite as demand-driven, we see pretty comparable comparisons. So really, the journey to becoming demand-driven can have some significant financial benefits. If we start thinking about, though, and asking people about their supply chain priorities, we surveyed both retail organizations and consumer products companies, and you can see one of the priorities that they're working on this year and the next year is how do I look at the supply chain, and how is the supply chain going to drive business growth? And we see joint value creation, VMI, as key enablers to that business growth. You'll also see a couple up at the top: improving efficiency and productivity, reducing operating costs. All of those are also enabled through joint value creation exercises, supplier collaboration relationships, and more tactically around this idea of VMI. But as you would expect, when we talk to retailers and we talk to consumer products companies, there are certainly obstacles that are in place that are blocking the achievement of these goals. So, first and foremost, the inability to coordinate and synchronize, end-to-end processes. That seems to be one of the big stumbling blocks when we talk to the organizations. Many organizations are very functionally aligned, very functionally focused on metrics, so it's hard to get that end-to-end visibility. But again, if you look at the top one and the bottom one, in terms of how joint value creation can work around supplier performance and visibility, and how we can work together between the retailer and their trading partners to take complexity out. You'll see those are all things that people are focused on. I kicked this off talking a little bit about inventory and the role of inventory. And we've put together the model that you see here, which helps people kind of understand, based on their maturity level and how they look at inventory, what does good look like? What are some of the things that we would expect to see in an organization as they start to determine the role of inventory in the organization? We typically see inventory looked at either kind of early on as a very department, very functional, very tactical goals around avoiding stockouts, lots of manual inputs, and some very kind of early adoption of early technology, spreadsheets and emails to be specifically. If we look at kind of as maturity grows and we see people out in that stage 4, that orchestrating level of maturity, you start to see the concept of inventory shift from a functional department to a much more value network approach. How do I look at inventory not only within my organization, but within my trading partner's organization? You start to see goals that are much more aligned between trading partners. So again, moving away from a very tactical measure of out of stocks to how are both businesses performing. The other thing that's starting to emerge is as retailers and other organizations look at where inventory is pooling, where is inventory starting to gather and accumulate in my organization, we ask people or try to encourage people to start to look and work backwards and start to try to understand the root cause of this inventory. So do I have, for example, in a manufacturing environment, do I have production bottlenecks? Do I have delivery issues? Am I uncomfortable with delivery accuracy and delivery frequency? So we've used this type of framework to get people to start and take a look at where inventory is living. And what that has done has started to spur these conversations with their trading partners around inventory and really started people to look at how can an activity like vendor managed inventory, how can that help me with these pockets and pools of inventory? Now, we've done a lot of research around this general concept of inventory management. We've got a lot of research that we can send people if they're interested. But what we've identified is a series of steps that help people move through this idea of managing their inventory. Clearly, starting with this idea of an owner, getting to a common or single owner of inventory. One of the big challenges that we see, not only with inventory management but also with VMI, is you have multiple owners of inventory. Visibility and analytics, being able to build a business case around how we're going to manage inventory. Oftentimes inventory and the network are conversations that happen concurrently. So how do I have my network structured? Where is inventory? What's the relationship between the ship-from point and the end consumer? And there's a skill set gap, lastly, between what organizations have within their organization around skill sets relative to inventory and optimization, and where do they need to get to really grow that competency within their organization. There's a series of observations around inventory management, lots of moving parts. Being able to get granular is very important, as well as a time definition in terms of how long you want that inventory to last and so on. And probably more importantly, and one of the big challenges I see as we talk to retailers around VMI is this third bullet, understanding the problem that you're solving for. What is the outcome you're looking to achieve, and how will inventory management get you to that point? The other stumbling block I see is people throwing technology at an inventory problem first without necessarily going back to that previous slide, understanding the drivers of inventory and understanding some of the business process and metrics that need to be in place in order to effectively execute against your inventory management strategy. You often have to spend money to save money in terms of investing primarily in people. Understanding where you are relative to your current skill sets and the skill sets that you'd like to acquire, oftentimes that requires investing in people. And the other, probably the third big bullet I would call out here is inventory management really needs to be a strategy or an ongoing program. Oftentimes, we saw this quite a bit over the last 12 to 18 months, where edicts came out of the financial departments that said we need to remove X percent of inventory out of the organization, and people took that as their marching order and undertook projects to remove inventory. But really it needs to be a strategy. It needs to be a systemic approach to understanding the role of inventory and how are you going to manage it within the parameters that work for your particular organization. So one of the things I wanted to do here at least is provide you from a research perspective. When we talk about VMI, really what are we talking about? And really it's a technique that allows two trading partners to kind of connect, ideally electronically, ideally through some business processes, to really plan and execute against core supply chain processes. More often than not, it's a forecasting and replenishment process, but it could be other processes, promotional planning as an example. It's about the streamlining of that connection and that connectivity between trading partners. You'll see from this slide 15, there are certain components that we see, ability to have visibility and connectivity, demand and inventory replenishment capabilities, and probably more importantly than most, this idea of performance measurement analytics. How do I know what I'm doing is actually achieving the goals that I wanted to achieve? We've also seen an emergence, particularly around VMI, around some key metrics. They tend to land in three buckets: financial, organizational, and functional. This is not meant to be kind of a mutually exhaustive list, but just a sense of, in order for VMI initiatives to be successful, the metrics and the definition of metrics need to be well thought out. We also see, if we go back to that a couple of slides ago, some of the functionality that organizations are asking for and looking to have as they start to go down the road, are in some of these major processes around infrastructure. So how do I connect myself with my organization? The planning side, as well as execution and analytics. So how do I create a good demand plan? How do I manage that within an inventory plan? How do I replenish? And then ultimately, how do I measure performance? Often asked, much like we are about being demand-driven, often asked, what's the value proposition of VMI? So we typically see things like improvement in on-shelf availability, big focus around inventory. How do I do more with the inventory that I have? One example from a food retailer we work with in a pet food category, increased turns as well as improve the service level, which are all good things from the retailer side. How do I streamline the flow of product? Is there an opportunity to streamline the flow for my supplier if I'm a retailer, take some burden off him or her, but also can I flow product more efficiently into my stores through this type of relationship? Improvements in on-shelf availability, as I mentioned, and obviously if you're improving on-shelf availability, you're going to have sales and margin improvements that flow through that. So let me just, before I turn it over to Paul and Dan, let me just wrap up with a couple thoughts. One of the things we continue to see both on the consumer product side and the retailer side is very strong continued interest in VMI. And it's really coming in two directions. We've got some mature retailers that are challenging their trading partners and actually pulling this VMI conversation into their dialogue with their trading partners. And we're also seeing some mature suppliers look to push their capabilities into the retail organizations. We're also seeing from those more mature retailers that are pulling these conversations, we're also seeing them not afraid to take their own ownership of some of these transactions if they feel their trading partners are not going to be able to keep up. I know a number of retailers who have been on VMI relationships have said, look, our maturity has grown to that greater than our trading partners. We're going to take some of this back and manage it ourselves. So as consumer products companies, it's very important to kind of monitor and measure the maturity of your retailers. We talked in the previous slide about the business value. There is significant value that can be realized from these types of organizations, and they can become and should be a key component in any joint value creation conversation. And really, what retailers are looking to smooth out is this demand volatility, particularly around items that are promoted, items that may have a heavy seasonal component. How do we kind of work together to smooth out that volatility? And VMI is a great way to do that with your trading partners. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Kara.
Great, thanks, Mike. I just want to have one follow-up question. I want to come back to that concept of joint value. I love that idea. What are the biggest areas for joint value creation, just in general as well as with VMI in particular?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kara. I mean, I think there's two big barriers that I see. One is kind of the ownership of the relationship. So typically on the retailer side, we see that relationship owned through the merchandising and the buying area, who have, a certain set of objectives and goals they're trying to achieve that are not necessarily aligned with what the supply chain is trying to do from a cost management perspective. So I think it's very important to understand the roles in terms of the relationship in joint value creation, who owns what, who's responsible for what, and then secondarily the metrics. Being able to sit down with your trading partners, map out a series of metrics that are good for both parties, that are at a level that can diagnose performance issues, but are not so tactical that that's all you ever talk about is, this delivery was late in the DC. Those conversations are important, but the conversations around how are we going to grow a category together, how are we going to find the right mix of products, those are the types of conversations that also should be happening in these joint value creation conversations.
Okay, makes perfect sense. Thanks. Okay, we'll come back to you at the end for the Q&A, but I appreciate your input, Mike. Appreciate it. Okay, Paula, the stage is yours, and I really, again, am happy to be able to share the Dannon story with the rest of the audience because you guys really have done a lot with VMI. So,
Kara, thank you so much. And again, it's a pleasure to be on this call with everyone. And share some of the information about Dannon. Again, I'm going to share some of the information about our VMI program and how it strengthens our relationship with our partners. Here's an outline of the areas that I'll cover in today's presentation. First, I'll start with a quick overview of the Dannon Company. Next, I'll give an explanation of our Customer First program and how that impacted our VMI roadmap. Then a brief recap of the history of VMI at Dannon. And finally, our evaluation of VMI and its benefits, along with some of the results that we have obtained. First, let me give you a quick overview of the Dannon Company for those of you that are not familiar with us. Dannon is owned by Dannon, which is based in Paris, France. Dannon is one of the world's leading food companies dedicated to health and wellness. And the Dannon Company has several popular brands here in the U.S., including Activia, Danimals, Dan Active, Light & Fit, and Danoninos. I can't talk about Dannon and Danone without mentioning at least or highlighting one initiative where we're actively involved in our community, because we believe that Dannon's role in society goes beyond the production of nutritious, great-tasting foods. We support a variety of activities within our communities to encourage better nutrition. One such program is the Dannon Institute. This institute was founded in 1997 and is not focused on the nutritional benefits of yogurt, but rather the mission of the Dannon Institute is to encourage and support research and education on the relationship between nutrition and health throughout all stages of life. Through this independent nonprofit foundation, parents, teachers, and anyone can obtain information regarding nutrition to use in educating children and adults. A quick overview of our manufacturing and distribution network shows that we have 3 plants in the U.S. distributing products throughout the U.S., Puerto Rico, and the Caribbean. Our plant in Minster, Ohio is the largest yogurt manufacturing plant in the world, producing 230,000 cups of yogurt per hour. We're currently in the process of expanding that facility to add even more manufacturing capacity. We also operate out of 6 distribution centers strategically located throughout the U.S. The network has actually been updated since this map was created, so it's a little out of date. Now to go over Dannon's Customer First program. In 2007, we began our Customer First program. The idea behind this program is to look at the business from the customer's perspective first. Ask what are their goals, what strategies do they have to obtain those goals, and what are their expectations of their suppliers. Then we looked at our goals and strategies and which ones of those aligned with our customers so that we can better partner with them to achieve joint results. For supply chain, we looked beyond shipping the product to the customer. Our desire was to influence the product to the store shelves. We wanted to help ensure our products were available at the shelf when the customer was there. As you can see, our goal was simply stated as to be the yogurt supply chain experts. Pursuing this vision would allow greater visibility up and down the supply chain. We would have greater influence on the flow of Dannon product to the shelf, improved product availability for the shopper, and a reduction of waste throughout the supply chain. So you may ask, why do retailers need yogurt supply chain experts? What's unique about yogurt? Well, yogurt is currently experiencing some tremendous growth in the U.S., as many of you are aware. Hopefully you're new consumers. So the consumption can be very volatile. And with its short shelf life of less than 50 days, yogurt can have one of the highest spoilage rates that our retailers if not managed closely. So becoming the yogurt supply chain experts to jointly manage the flow of our product to the shelf would be a tremendous benefit to both the retailer and to Dannon. Our vision of influencing our product to the shelf opened up new or expanded territories for collaboration with our retailers. We wanted to leverage all of the levels of data that were available, warehouse, store, and shelf. And based on those levels of data, we identified the depth of collaboration or influence that was available into our retailer supply chain. For warehouse data exchange, we identified VMI as a key enabler. A VMI program allows us to manage our products to the customer's warehouse, which impacts store and shelf availability. We also felt that we could leverage our VMI process and tools for retailers who wanted to retain the replenishment order creation in-house, but would exchange warehouse-level data with us. We would assist them in managing their inventory by providing additional analysis and insights regarding their product flow. We would use those insights, in turn, to also support our internal initiative to improve our short-term order forecast. The next level we looked at was POS or store POS data. And finally, shelf data, including on-shelf availability information. Along with data availability, it is important that the retailer and supplier are both willing to share knowledge and collaborate on joint goals. Open and continuous communication between the supplier and retailer is essential for the success of the relationship. We also recognized that we needed engagement from cross-functional team members from both the retailer and from Dannon. And finally, a willingness to make decisions and take action to accelerate the flow of product throughout the supply chain. We reviewed each of these levels of data, warehouse, store, and shelf, and tied them to the programs that we currently had using that data. We recognized the value in each one. Understanding the amount of influence we would have would differ depending on how close it was to the store shelf. Now I'm going to go over, we're going to focus on VMI and the benefits to the retailer and to the supplier, and how it can be a key enabler to a customer collaboration program. A VMI program can be the quickest and most scalable of the programs that we identified. And looking at the history of Dannon's VMI program, you'll see that Dannon has offered a VMI program or service to our retailers for over a decade. The amount of participation in this program would vary slightly as some customers decided to take the replenishment back in-house, or as others added additional warehouses. For the past few years, we have not actively been pursuing additional customers. We were simply maintaining the relationships that we had. One of the reasons we had not actively pursued additional VMI partners was that VMI was viewed as a supply chain initiative. The goals we set were supply chain based, and when reviewing benefits, we stopped at the traditional supply chain metrics of forecast accuracy or visibility, and the ability to adjust orders along with truck utilization and full pallet percentages. Any additional resources to manage the relationships were from the supply chain budget. The program was viewed internally as a very transactional one. Our VMI analysts had good relationships with their counterparts, but we did not leverage the data that was available as greatly as we could or should have done. We successfully met or exceeded our VMI KPIs of turns or service level from the customer's warehouse. On average, our turns for VMI exceeded 60, and our warehouse service level was always above 97%. A large portion of the criteria for doing VMI with a customer was the volume per week for that customer's location. This was primarily due to the additional resources needed to manage a VMI relationship. But now with our new vision, we were viewing VMI as one enabler to ensure product at our customers' shelves. This meant that we needed to review what we thought we already knew about VMI and its benefits. We identified what we believed were the benefits for both the retailer and supplier. The ones we identified were fairly standard, but for us, it was a broader view than identifying our stopping at supply chain KPIs. So for the customers, we believed that VMI could help improve the margin on our items. This would come from reducing the overall inventory levels, speeding up the flow of product through the supply chain, and even creating an opportunity to sell the product prior to or close to our term. Additionally, through the product flow improvement, we could reduce the amount of product that was thrown away at the shelf or in the warehouse due to code dates. By improving the service to stores, having the right product at the right time in the warehouse, we would see an increase in sales and a further reduction of costs through increased efficiencies in servicing those stores. The retailer also saw benefits of reduced in-house resources needed to manage orders due to our focus by a dedicated analyst. For the supplier, specifically Dannon, we saw the potential of an improved short-term order forecast, which would allow us to provide a better fill rate to our customers while reducing inventory levels in-house. Increased shipping efficiencies in the form of improved truck utilization and an overall reduction of waste reduce the amount of trucks or shipments used for the same volume of sales at the retailer's register. Also, improved product availability for the shopper and preferred partner status, which would result in higher sales and a greater influence in the category. Next, just to recap some of the shared benefits, some of which were repeated from the previous slide. The shared benefits included increased sales, decreased costs, and a partnership which ultimately results in greater shopper satisfaction. Now that we identified the value, or once we identified the value of VMI as an enabler to increase collaboration and obtain better business results, we needed to step back and evaluate our VMI system itself and determine whether or not it would allow us to expand our VMI partnerships. We compared our legacy capabilities to our ideal system. So for our legacy system, we actually saw that it prohibited expansion of VMI. The system required extensive manual inputs to generate optimal orders. Updating or modifying the legacy system was not an easy option due to costly system maintenance. Other concerns included limited availability or ability to manage promotions and new items, no reporting capabilities, and limited internal expertise and training. Ideally, our new system would be expandable, fast, and low cost. That pointed us to a SaaS platform where maintenance costs would be absorbed by the provider. We wanted the assurance that the upgrades or enhancements that we wanted would be made as business needs changed. Additional features we desired were multiple options to manage promotions, new items, discontinued items, standard ad hoc reporting capabilities for all users, and robust training and support availability. We knew that changing systems would require a lot of work. We would be requesting to move from a legacy platform to a standalone SaaS option. Concerns regarding security and change management would need to be addressed. We also knew that the change had to be transparent to our current VMI partners. We would not allow our performance to suffer. Again, we had maintained turns of greater than 6 days, along with a service level above 97%, depending on the current VMI agreement with that customer. So what decisions did we make? Well, we did go ahead and choose Data Alliance for our new provider and work with them to convert and test with one customer. We began this test in the fourth quarter of 2010. We compared the results we obtained versus our original needs and found that we were successful in all of the areas that we thought were most critical. The results we obtained were that our analyst time was now used reviewing the customer data rather than creating orders. The input and calculations were done primarily by the system. Conservatively, we've seen a 30% reduction in the time it takes us to review and analyze our accounts. We also believe that the analysis is much more thorough and timely. This point alone was significant for us. Remember, we did not switch systems because we could not perform to our desired KPIs, but the slow and manual process we had to follow prohibited us from expanding our VMI partnerships, and we saw this as a key enabler for us to be able to influence our product at the shelf. In reviewing some of the points that we were looking for originally, we saw that the annual system costs could be covered by the cost avoidance of additional employees. We had already experienced several changes and developments completed during our test, and as we identified additional needs to manage our business, enhancements were made. We also have some additional ongoing projects with the company. Although they have 3 scheduled updates per year, but we've had the ability or seen their ability to go ahead and roll those updates out to us outside of those scheduled updates. We have the standard reports that we're looking for, along with ad hoc, and then training and daily support is available. Based on those results, we decided to put a plan in place to go ahead and convert all of our VMI partners over to a SaaS system by the end of the first quarter, and we also have some additional partners beginning with us in early April. As we bring on new partners, we will evaluate them based on their ability and willingness to share data and information, and won't be limited by the volume that they can provide to try to offset the cost of an additional headcount. So here are some of the results that we obtained from both our program here in the U.S., and then I also pulled in some of the results from other Dannon CDUs that are on VMI. We've seen an improvement in our internal forecast accuracy. Once an account participates in VMI, we saw an increase of 8 percentage points, which is pretty significant. We also saw an increase in trucking efficiencies. Truck utilization was significantly higher for our VMI accounts versus our non-VMI accounts. We saw that on average the utilization was almost 20% higher. Our full pallet percentage increased by 2.1 percentage points. And in improved shopper availability, we saw our service level from the warehouse improve by 1.5 percentage points, and our fill rate to the customer increased by 0.2 of a percentage point. Keeping in mind that our fill rate, generally those metrics were pretty high to begin with, so that increase did help, though, improve some of the availability on the shelf. So in summary, Dannon believes that through increased collaboration, we can continue to grow the yogurt category in a profitable manner to both the retailer and Dannon. We see VMI as a key enabler to increase our ability to influence our products at the customer shelf and increasing sales. We will look to expand our use of warehouse-level data for our VMI program. We will leverage the store-level data as it becomes available to delve deeper into the supply chain of our customers. And we will expand our use of store-level alerts to assist our customers in managing the product to their shelves and into their shoppers' baskets. And, Kara, that completes my presentation.
Great, thanks. Cute little girl there. You guys certainly have had some pretty impressive results, so congratulations to you. As you can imagine, the questions from the audience are coming in. So let me just start with one. There are some questions about the legacy platform that you were on, and I'm also curious, given that legacy platform, what was the most difficult thing about switching to a software-as-a-service platform?
I think it really geared around our IF group and their concerns around the security that was available. They felt pretty comfortable that we had made the decision that was best for us, for the business users, but their concerns obviously were around the security that was available and then also what type of ongoing support they would need to provide once we switched over. So we set up several meetings to walk through any concerns that they had so that we could make sure that we were all comfortable with the change and that if there was any support that would be needed down the road, they would be able to work within within our needs. So, so probably just the change management itself.
Okay, great. And what was the platform you were running before?
Oh, sorry, apologize. We were on SAP, or we're actually still on SAP for everything but VMI.
Just the VMI piece is perfect. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Paula. You can take a breath now, and we'll come back to you for the Q&A at the end. Okay, so Scott, I want to turn the floor over to you for the daunting task of coming after that presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Kara. This is Scott Kleiner with Data Alliance, and there are three topics that I'd like to cover over the next 10 minutes. First, I want to give you a quick overview of Data Alliance. Secondly, I want to provide our perspective on VMI activity, specifically in the consumer packaged goods industry. And finally, I'd like to highlight a few key and emerging VMI requirements that we're seeing from our customers like Dannon and other CPG companies that are active in VMI. First, an overview of Data Alliance. As Paula mentioned, we are a software as a service VMI offering, and as such, we take responsibility to manage the EDI data flows, the item forecast development, order quantity calculation, and generating the reports that are required by our customers and their customers. We surround these functions with full system support, ongoing application improvement, and a customer care organization who acts as our primary customer touchpoint. The ship-to locations our VMI replenishment services support are wholesalers, distribution centers, as well as retail store shelves. A little bit more about us. The industries that we support are listed there: electrical, heavy-duty, plumbing. I know we have quite a few consumer goods folks in this audience, and it might be a surprise to them of the number of industries that are actually active in addition to consumer goods and VMI. Our customer totals, we have over 70 customers today and manage greater than 12 million SKUs at 13,000 locations on a daily basis. In consumer goods specifically, the products our customers are using VMI to replenish include paper products, dairy, food, water, juice, diapers, and in those last three categories, the apparel, DVDs, and cosmetics, those are primarily store-level, shelf-level replenishment items. I want to give you a bit of our perspective on VMI activity in the industry, but recognizing that our discussions that lead to this point of view are with suppliers and retailers that are both interested and active in VMI. And what we see is important to them are two things. One's growth, and the second one is cost control. And I'll address growth first. Existing VMI suppliers, not talking about those that have been involved with VMI for 10 or 15 plus years, we see these suppliers growing as a result of rediscovering of the value of VMI. But we also see new proactive suppliers, CPG companies that have not been engaged in VMI relationships, now coming involved. As mentioned by Mike, we've also seen retailers who had taken ordering responsibility back a few years ago, opening up to more VMI relationships. They're selective in those relationships, more collaborative, but we see growth there as well. And finally, we're seeing growth in private label manufacturer participation in VMI. In the area of cost control, we see suppliers looking to provide VMI value to themselves and to their retailers at less cost. It really looks to be a strategy to address the impact of commodity price increases, an extended recession, and certainly store brand influence. And as a result, we're seeing suppliers applying a greater effort toward a more thorough evaluation of the true cost of VMI. And I think Paula addressed this as well, looking at the impact of VMI across all department budgets. And through this due diligence, we're seeing suppliers that are looking at potentially alternative VMI solutions. I want to turn our attention to what we consider relatively new and emerging requirements that we're seeing in consumer packaged goods area and how Data Alliance is addressing it. First, companies want the ability to combine multiple orders across the same or different retailers in a single shipment. And what we've done, and this is through a release that we had in January of this year, is first, as a part of that development release, is what we do is present transport groups to our suppliers, and those transport groups are defined as the DCs and or store locations that a supplier considers when building a single shipment. From that transport group, the inventory planner of the supplier selects the best DC store locations to combine on the shipment. And those could be, in the examples listed there, all club stores. If you've got multiple Costco's in a geographic area, it could be those stores. Or it could be a club store plus DC, so it could be a Costco location plus a Kroger DC and a Winn-Dixie DC in the same location. But once selected, the order is then built up and optimizing those items across all the locations selected. And the business value we're finding is certainly lower shipment costs, but lower inventories across the supply chain. And the second area, in a VMI environment, and I know with the consumer goods audience we have, they understand this, there's really an ongoing challenge for the supplier to manage promotional events. Retailers are certainly not uniform in the way promotion data is sent or how they want that data handled when it is sent. So we're always looking to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of promotion management. And several things that we're doing today. We're working with our customers to automate the amount of promotion quantities released based on the success of the promotion. In another area, we're looking to speed the process for a planner to apply previous promotion results to any upcoming promotions, which we know some of the retailers request that CPG companies do that in promotion management. And finally, we want to better manage the turn forecast as a result of a promotion, especially the focus required as you exit the promotion. So in consumer packaged goods, promotions certainly look to be here to stay. So we'll consistently and constantly look to improve planner productivity and overall promotion management. Final requirement that I wanted to speak to, and this was mentioned by Dannon as well, CPG companies want the ability to drive that VMI replenishment based on that store POS and demand data. And the way we're addressing it, we're working and collaborating with retail data solutions providers, people like Market 6, Vision Chain, and others, who provide that store-level POS and inventory analytic data. We look to take that resulting store demand forecast that they produce, aggregate it at a DC level, and use that as the VMI forecast driver. Now, in our experience, the items where store demand forecast fits best, high velocity items, seasonal items, and heavily promoted items. And again, one of the goals that Dannon had indicated the business value of doing this is really getting your VMI orders and have them more closely reflect true demand. Any additional information you're interested about Data Alliance is at our website, datalliance.com. And Kara, I'll send it back to you.
Great, thanks. I'm really curious about, you had a slide about the growth in VMI, and you mentioned private label manufacturers. So I'm really curious, you're seeing a greater activity from that group in particular?
Yeah, we are. And what's been interesting about it is if it's their first trading relationship, it's a retailer pull. It's a retailer that's requested the private label manufacturer to establish that VMI trading relationship. But we're also seeing those that have experienced VMI to some extent now expanding that participation as well.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I want to bring Mike and Paula back into the conversation, and there certainly have been a lot of questions flying around from the audience, so I want to try to get to as many of them as we can. First, I guess back to Mike, and this is something that Paula said. Paula mentioned that their VMI process was initially owned by the supply chain group, and I'm curious, based on your research, who owns that process and who should own it?
Yeah, good question. I'm in the middle of doing some research now, talking to retailers and some technology providers like Data Alliance around, who are they seeing as the owner? And what appears to be happening is because of the pressure to demonstrate kind of the financial side of this, the business case, and with oftentimes, as Paula alluded to, a lot of the value landing in the supply chain, we're definitely seeing a migration to the supply chain owning these types of initiatives. I think, often the conversation may initially be brokered by the buyers or the merchants, but at the end of the day, because there's a heavy supply chain impact and influence, and it's a pretty supply chain transaction-centric initiative, the supply chain seems to be the area that's gaining momentum in terms of the owner.
Okay, that makes sense. Perfect. You also mentioned, Scott actually mentioned at the end that high velocity and promoted items where he was seeing the most activity. Paula, since you certainly, I would put yogurt in that category, considering the amount of yogurt I go through in my family. I'm curious about how much of your business, if it's moving that quickly, what % of your volume is on VMI at this point?
If I look at total VMI, CPFR, or any other forms of data sharing or collaboration that we're doing now, we're about at 50% of our volume. Our target is to reach 70% within the next couple of years.
And is that growth going to be with different new customers or more products or more categories? Where's that growth coming from?
The growth will come from additional retailers that we'll partner with. We don't look at necessarily the accounts we're partnering with just getting bigger and owning a larger piece of the pie. We are looking to expand with some additional retailers.
Okay, great. Mike, back to you. What other types of products lend themselves well to VMI, and maybe what type of retailers are most successful with this kind of program?
Well, I think Scott touched on a little bit. I mean, probably the vast majority of interest seems to be in the food retailing space, and within that, kind of the consumer products type of things that food retailers sell. I mean, products, because of some of the things that Paula talked about around transportation savings and, pallets, we tend to see, bulkier items, paper products, some of those types of things seem to lend themselves pretty well to VMI. I think depending on the maturity around the promotion, as Scott alluded to, promoted products could be a good candidate. But more often than not, we tend to see products that have a pretty stable demand signal. One that's pretty consistent, it's pretty easy to predict, may not necessarily have a lot of seasonality in it. And it's just an easier, getting back to some of the things I talked about in terms of the product flow, it's a little bit easier to kind of smooth out the flow of those types of products. I think, we definitely in the food space are seeing it. I think you're also starting to see it in some of the apparel and some of the specialty retailers for product, again, that kind of fits those attributes. They're starting to visit VMI, as an inventory strategy.
Okay, perfect. Scott, there are a bunch of technology questions for you, and we'll certainly won't be able to get to all of them now, but we can follow up. But the one that's coming up a lot is about the SAP integration. So I'm just curious if you can comment a little bit about how you integrate with backbones like SAP.
Well, obviously, when you talk about integration, there's fairly broad interpretation of integration. Maybe the best way to answer that is of the 70-plus customers we have, about 35%, 40% are SAP customers that we work with and integrate with. But we certainly integrate with other ERP systems across the board.
Okay, so I want to wrap up by just asking our panelists to give a piece of advice to, look in the crystal ball for the future, or based on what you've done in the past. What would you recommend? What are some of the gotchas that you might be able to help people avoid for those companies really just getting going with VMI, or those looking to expand their VMI interactions? I'll start with you.
Okay. I guess what I would say, we took a step back and we said, what's our vision for the future? We want to be able to influence our product to the shelf. So then we looked at what the enablers were to achieve that. So I think each company needs to determine, what's really their end game. What do they want to get out of this? And then determine, I think Mike even touched upon this, then determine if VMI is an enabler for that. Because it does take a lot of commitment, I think, from your group. There's change management as far as increasing their knowledge. There's a lot more communication that has to take place. We restructured so that we were formed into cross-functional teams so that we could partner more closely with our retailers. So, but I guess instead of going on longer, I would say determine what you want to be, why this is important, and then determine if VMI is an enabler for you.
Perfect. Thanks. Mike, comments?
I would echo Paula's observation, which is a very good one. I think retailers need to adopt more of that pull mentality. There's a lot of benefits in VMI. Paula shared some, I shared some, Scott shared some. So I would love to see retailers be a little bit more aggressive in reaching out to their trading partners and asking about VMI and other inventory management strategies. But in doing so, I come back to, reinforcing what Paula said. You really have to understand the problem that you're solving for, and not every inventory situation is a good candidate for VMI, but there are a lot of them out there, and I think people just need to go into it with their eyes open and understand, the business challenge they're trying to solve and make the right match between that particular business challenge and a VMI relationship.
Okay, Scott, final thoughts.
It's really just an extension of what was said by Mike and Paula, but really attempt to make that trading relationship as collaborative as possible and set, meaningful expectations as you establish those relationships.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank our audience for their time today. I especially want to thank Data Alliance for their sponsorship of this webinar, and our three speakers, Mike Griswold, Paula Sawyer, and Scott Kleiner.